The Situationist thinker Guy Debord said that all art, even art that aspires to be countercultural, is just part of a capitalist spectacle. Still, every 2 years or so, I travel to Venice for its Biennale of Contemporary Art, hoping to see art that breaks with aesthetic convention in a thought-provoking way. Art that is, in a word, countercultural. Like the lifeguard chairs created by an emerging Lithuanian artist selected for the 2019 Biennale. His lifeguard chairs were meant to give the guards a place to sit. And the placement of one lifeguard chair facing a work by a well-established American artist, a tall pink sculpture entitled Bather, evoked a counterculture observing the dominant culture. So, last fall, I traveled to Venice to see the 2022 Biennale, whose artistic director, Cecilia Alemani, happened to walk by as she was giving a private tour of her show. The wall text for her exhibition noted that, for the first time in its 127-year history, the Biennale will include a majority of women and gender nonconforming artists, a choice that reflects a deliberate rethinking of man's centrality in the history of art and contemporary culture. It sounded great, as though the entire main exhibition of the Biennale had turned countercultural. But this exhibition mostly showed the kind of codified, easy-to-consume cliches that feed the needs of a dominant culture. The expressionless face of this huge sculpture refused to engage anyone's gaze, but could not mask the banality of its overall design. Its artist won the Golden Lion Prize for Best Artist at the 2022 Biennale. But since before the Biennale, her sculpture occupied an imposing site atop New York City's High Line, and from the very start of the Biennale, it was installed in a place of honor, the very first room of the Arsenale. The Golden Lion Prize was not recognizing an emerging countercultural artist. This massive pile of earth was said to evoke how soil dies yet regenerates itself. But the bulldozers that filled this space with loads of earth didn't leave much room for one's imagination, except perhaps to consider whether it symbolized how a dominant culture perpetuates itself by flattening nonconformists into conformity. The works featuring skeletons or other ghoulish objects could have been meant to raise the consciousness of viewers about environmental threats. But if so, they were such cliches that they might just have reminded them of the stuff their neighbors put on the yards of their suburban homes to celebrate Halloween. The yarn and wool scarecrows in this installation also looked a bit Halloweenish. Yet the kudzu, which the artist had planted at the start of the Biennale and then let run wild, looked like a metaphor for a counterculture overrunning the dominant culture. A counterculture that, instead of filling the world with more stuff, played with the stuff that fills the world. At the Pavilion of Japan, a Japanese art collective built a mirrored rectangular column where visitors paused for a specular moment of self-reflection, or just walked by. From the second floor, a viewer looked down at them through a clear glass mirror. Part of this intervention could have been a countercultural parody of the social media that dominate our culture, because, like a voyeur looking through a webcam, we watched other visitors from above, the way we might follow the feed of their tweets and the retweets of their followers. And we came to realize that, like them, we need to get on with our lives. The artists selected to represent Germany created no physical works of art for the German pavilion. Instead, revealing Germany's mournful history, she removed layers of plaster from the walls, excavated its floors, and exposed the frame of two buildings, the original constructed around 1909 and an addition constructed by the German government in 1938 under the Nazi regime. On one wall, the artist added text that was difficult to decipher, as though, once the pavilion's walls were laid bare, they might speak words. I heard one wall voicing out loud this thought of the German-born philosopher Herbert Marcuse. Art cannot change the world, but it can contribute to changing the consciousness and drives of the men and women who change the world. The artists selected to represent Spain also created no physical works of art. After realizing that the exterior frame of the Spanish pavilion had originally been built 10 degrees out of line with the Biennale's neighboring country pavilions, he had new walls constructed to show how the pavilion's interior would look if the building as a whole had been built differently, aligned with its neighbors. He called his intervention corrección. What was the correction? The completely empty Spanish pavilion left that question unanswered, unless the answer was the empty space itself, which stretched the universe of art beyond the frame of a canvas into the viewer's material surroundings, making them part of the artist's intervention, each one responsible for how its memory gets preserved. Of course, it takes more than empty space to make an artistic statement. The Russian pavilion was closed to the public throughout the 6-month run of the 2022 Biennale. It was not part of a countercultural movement. It also takes more than a break with aesthetic convention. This artist's work no doubt broke with the aesthetic conventions of her day, but she could not be considered part of a countercultural movement, as she spent almost all her life confined inside a mental institution, where she remained a lonely outsider. It is no accident that the artist chosen to represent Belgium made videos around the world showing children playing, as children, like artists, can have a fresh take on the dominant culture. One video shot near a mine in the Congo that extracts cobalt for lithium battery-powered electric vehicles showed a child pushing a tire up a huge pile of slag, then getting inside and rolling back down the hill. The hill of slag, to many, symbolizes man's desecration of the planet in the name of progress. But for this child, it was a fun place to go for a spin. Electric vehicles, many think, may help save the planet from environmental disaster. But this child did not need an electric vehicle. He looks to be more of a lonely outsider than part of a countercultural movement. Yet, he does have followers. In the late 1950s, this piece by Robert Rauschenberg, entitled Bed, was refused entry at 2 European art exhibitions because the organizers thought it an insult to the other artists in these shows. A few years later, Rauschenberg's work was still considered countercultural, but it was exhibited at the 1964 Venice Biennale, where it won him its Golden Lion Prize for Best Artist. Rauschenberg's evolution out of rejection and into the limelight brings to mind the observation of Professor Maeve Emre that a genuinely countercultural practice can only flourish for so long before being co-opted by the dominant culture. How soon will the countercultural statements at the 2022 Venice Biennale get co-opted by the dominant culture? To answer this question, I found mixed clues during my stay in Paris shortly after seeing the Venice Biennale, when on the top floor of the Montmartre Museum, I visited the refurbished studio of the 20th century painter Suzanne Valadon. Valadon painted around 100 years ago, but it wasn't until very, very recently that 2 major museum exhibitions lifted her out of relative obscurity, with catalogues praising her portraits and nudes for breaking new ground. As with Valadon, will it take nearly a century before the countercultural movement at the 2022 Biennale gains recognition? Or is the writing already on the wall, since this movement now has at least one follower?